In the thick, humid mist enveloping the foothills of the Great Andes, silence is never absolute. The rustle of leaves, the cries of night birds, and the faint hum of distant waterfalls create a symphony in which a keen ear can discern something alien. There, where the tropical forest meets the harsh mountain slopes, in the shadow of gigantic ferns, a man stands frozen. His breathing is even, almost soundless, and his gaze is directed towards a barely visible path along which a caravan is due to pass in a few minutes. He is not a casual traveler, nor a local rebel. On his wrist are old chassis, with an engraving in a language that here, thousands of kilometers from the snow-covered plains of Eurasia, seems otherworldly. In the pocket of his faded jacket lies an encrypted dispatch, and in his hands, a tool capable of bringing a protracted political dispute to an end faster than any United Nations rostrum. At this moment, as a drop of sweat slowly rolls down his temple, the fate of not just a single region, but an entire vector of global influence is being decided. Here, in the green hell of Latin America, the real work of those who officially do not exist begins. For a long time, the Western Hemisphere was considered an inviolable space under the vigilant supervision of its northern neighbor. However, the second half of the 20th century introduced its own adjustments to this established geographical dogma. A vast continent, pulsating with a thirst for change and social justice, transformed into a giant chessboard where pieces moved according to rules written in distant offices. The Soviet presence in this region is often portrayed as exclusively economic aid or equipment supplies. But behind the facade of official visits and slogans of solidarity lay a different reality. This was an era when diplomacy acquired a metallic taste, and state interests were defended not only at round tables, but also deep behind enemy lines. The need to create a reliable barrier against external interference required people of a special kind. Those who could dissolve into the crowd, speak local dialects without an accent, and carry out tasks that would never be written about in the morning newspapers. Influence in this region was built on a delicate balance between supporting legitimate governments and strengthening conspiratorial cells ready to seize power at the right moment. The main goal was to create conditions under which the influence of opponents would be minimized, and the continent's resources would cease to flow in one direction. This required not just weapons, but a deep understanding of local specifics, the ability to build connections with those willing to go all the way for their convictions. Specialists sent overseas underwent years of training. They studied not only tactics and strategy, but also the psychology, culture, and daily life of the peoples inhabiting the Amazon jungles and the heights of Bolivia. Each mission was a step into the unknown, where the only support remained faith in the correctness of the chosen path and the reliability of comrades nearby. The external contour of this confrontation looked like a series of coups, strikes, and local conflicts erupting now in one, now in another part of the continent. Official Moscow always emphasized its adherence to the principles of non-interference, yet reality dictated different conditions. When in one of the Caribbean or Central American countries there arose a threat of physical elimination of a friendly leader, professionals stepped in. They arrived disguised as agronomists, engineers, or doctors, but their real tool was the ability to organize defense where it seemed impossible. These people became invisible architects of security, building intelligence and counterintelligence systems capable of resisting the most sophisticated adversaries. Visible clashes were merely the tip of the iceberg, concealing titanic work in gathering information and preventing provocations aimed at destabilizing the regions. At the center of these events were always individuals whose fates intertwined in a tight knot with the history of a foreign country. Imagine an officer forced to conceal his true identity for years, even from those closest to him. His daily routine is a constant analysis of risks and a search for escape routes. The internal conflict of such a person lies in the need to maintain a cool head when passions and hatred rage around him. He sees how the ideals he fights for sometimes clash with the harsh reality of local politics, where loyalty can be bought and betrayal justified by necessity. Every decision made in the shadow of palm trees carries the burden of responsibility for the lives of hundreds and thousands of people. This internal dialogue between duty to a distant homeland and empathy for the people among whom he lives becomes his constant companion. Ambitions and fears intertwined in the souls of those who steered secret operations. On one hand, there was the desire to prove their effectiveness and expand the sphere of influence of their system. On the other, the understanding that any mistake could lead to catastrophic consequences on a global scale. These individuals were not merely executors of the center's will, they were intellectuals who understood the complexity of the geopolitical game. They realized that every successful step to strengthen a revolutionary cell provoked a retaliatory reaction, even more rigid and sophisticated. In this psychological duel, victory went to those who could calculate moves decades in advance, sacrificing immediate gain for a long-term perspective. The personal dramas of professionals who lost touch with home and were forced to live in a world of false names became the price they paid for the opportunity to influence the course of history. On an ideological level, it was a clash of two fundamentally different concepts of the future. On one side, a model of rigid hierarchy and resource exploitation in the interests of large corporations. On the other, the idea of a radical restructuring of society based on principles of equality and collectivism. Latin America became a laboratory where these ideas were tested for strength in real-life conditions. The paradox was that to achieve humane goals, methods far from humanism often had to be used. Ideological confrontation demanded toughness, and those who believed in a bright future were forced to master the art of conducting affairs in the shadows, where lead, not words, became the argument. It was a time of great hopes and equally great disappointments, when faith in progress clashed with centuries-old traditions and inertia of thought. The philosophical conflict was exacerbated by the fact that the very concept of freedom was interpreted differently by the parties. For some, freedom meant the unimpeded conduct of business. For others, liberation from colonial heritage and the right to their own land. Soviet specialists brought not only military knowledge, but also a vision of a world where there was no place for oppression. However, the implementation of these ideas into a soil steeped in different values required not only tactical skill, but also philosophical flexibility. The clash of value systems gave rise to new forms of social organization that often did not fit into any existing theories. It was a search for a third way, which passed through the crucible of armed clashes and secret missions. The situation began to change dramatically when methods of direct confrontation yielded fewer and fewer results, and the cost of each operation increased. The moment came when a hidden presence had to transform into something more substantial or disappear entirely. One such turning point was the development of an operation to neutralize a key communication hub, through which opponents' actions across the entire Southern Hemisphere were coordinated. This decision was made after it became clear that without destroying this information structure, any attempts to protect revolutionary gains were doomed to failure. A transformation in perception also occurred among the participants themselves. They realized that the game was not for territories, but for the minds of people, and that the success of the mission depended not on the amount of resources expended, but on the precision and timeliness of the strike delivered. An unexpected revelation for many was that the local population, despite years of indoctrination, maintained surprising resilience and capacity for self-organization. This forced a re-evaluation of strategy and a focus on cultivating local personnel capable of independently solving defense and governance tasks. A shift in perception also occurred in high offices, where it was understood: Latin America is not merely the enemy's rear, but an independent historical subject with its own interests and ambitions. This discovery changed the nature of interaction, making it more equitable and profound, which in turn led to the creation of more stable and viable structures of influence. The climax came during a period when tensions reached their peak, and it seemed that the continent was about to ignite from a single spark. At this moment, all threads of covert operations converged at a single point, in an attempt to prevent a large-scale invasion that was being prepared on the region's outer borders. This was a final clash of ideas and forces, where each participant had to demonstrate their maximum capabilities. The moment of truth arrived when encrypted telegrams were replaced by direct commands, and silenced pistols spoke at full volume, eliminating key figures capable of ordering the start of active operations. This invisible battle decided the outcome of many future years, solidifying the positions of those who could act decisively and professionally in the most extreme conditions. The denouement was swift and effective. Through pinpoint strikes and skillful coordination, the opponent's plans were destabilized, and the integrity of key alliances was preserved. This was a triumph of lead diplomacy, where force became the only way to maintain peace and order. All information flows, all years of preparation, and all personal sacrifices led to this single result. The continent did not plunge into chaos, but received a chance for independent development, albeit under the cover of an invisible shield created by professionals from a distant country. This success demonstrated that even in the shadow of great mountains, great deeds can be accomplished if truth and the might of a great state stand behind you. Today, looking back, we can draw important lessons from the events that unfolded in the shadow of the Andes. The main one is that any influence based solely on force is short-lived if it is not supported by a deep understanding of local specifics and respect for the interests of the people. The events of those years show that in global politics, there are no secondary regions, and every step on the international stage must be calculated with long-term consequences in mind. For the modern world, this experience is more relevant than ever, as methods of struggle for influence have become even more sophisticated, and the information space has transformed into a new battlefield. The universal truth is that defending one's interests requires not only determination, but also wisdom, the ability to see beyond the external attributes of a conflict to its underlying essence. The significance of these secret missions extends beyond mere historical interest. They shaped the modern face of Latin America, contributed to the awakening of national self-awareness, and laid the groundwork for the formation of a multipolar world. The lessons of lead diplomacy remind us that behind every political decision stand living people, their ideals, fears, and hopes. We see how the echoes of those events resonate in modern conflicts, reminding us of the need to find a balance between force and diplomacy, between the interests of the state and the value of human life. This story teaches us to cherish peace, which is often kept afloat by the invisible efforts of those willing to act in the shadows for the common good. Returning to that damp haze at the foot of the Andes, we realize that the silence of this forest holds much more than just the sounds of nature. It holds the memory of people who once came here to change the world. Their tracks have long been washed away by tropical rains, and their names remain only in top-secret archives. But the result of their work is felt even today. The caravan that was supposed to pass along the trail never reached its destination, and this small event became a link in a huge chain that prevented a great disaster. Lead diplomacy completed its active phase, giving way to new forms of interaction. But the spirit of that time, the spirit of determination and self-sacrifice, continues to live in those who today defend the interests of their country on distant frontiers. The final thought that remains with us after getting acquainted with this hidden page of history is that true influence is born where professionalism meets conviction. Control over an entire continent was not just a game for resources, it was a battle for the right to determine the future of humanity. And let the issues be resolved differently today than 30 or 40 years ago, the principles laid in the shadow of the great mountains remain unchanged. Wisdom, patience, and readiness to act at any moment. This is the legacy left to us by the masters of the invisible front. Their story is a reminder that even in the darkest forest, one can find a path to light if one knows what one is moving forward for. Every word in the encrypted telegram, every shot from a silent weapon, and every sleepless night in the jungle was a contribution to the stability that we sometimes take for granted. Understanding this gives us the opportunity to look anew at modern geopolitical processes and to appreciate the role of those who remain in the shadows, doing their work so that the world remains as we know it. This cyclical return to the origins allows us to more deeply realize the significance of every decision made and the responsibility that every person bears before history. In the shadow of the Andes, the foliage still rustles, and this whisper seems to be a story of great deeds accomplished in the name of a future that has already arrived. When the sun rises above the mountain peaks, illuminating valleys and forests, it becomes clear that no secrets can be hidden forever. Sooner or later, history reveals its cards, allowing us to see the true scale of what happened. Soviet specialists in Latin America left behind not only legends, but also real achievements that continue to serve as the foundation for relations between peoples. Their mission was accomplished, and although the methods of lead diplomacy have passed into history, the lessons learned in those harsh years continue to guide us in finding ways to a more just and safer world. This path is difficult and thorny, but the example of those who walked it before us gives hope and confidence that any obstacles can be overcome if one acts with wisdom and honor. Concluding this narrative, it is worth emphasizing once again that the true strength of a state lies not only in its economy or army, but also in its people, capable of impossible feats for higher goals. The history of covert operations in Latin America is a hymn to professionalism and devotion to duty, echoing through decades, calling us to be worthy of the memory of those who stood guard over peace in the most challenging times. May this resonance help us better understand the present and look to the future with confidence, knowing that behind every great event stand great people whose work, though unseen, holds enduring value for all humanity. 159 days a year, rains pour in these latitudes, washing away the boundaries between past and present. But those who endured this ordeal know, memory is something that cannot be destroyed by time or elements. The year 1980 became a time when many processes reached a point of no return. 35,000 characters of history, written in sweat and blood, cannot convey the full breadth of what was experienced, but they give us a key to understanding how the modern security architecture was built. December 21st, when one of the most successful operations of that period concluded, will forever remain a date symbolizing the triumph of will over circumstances. 95% of success in such matters depends on preparation, and only 5% on luck. These figures became the golden rule for generations of professionals. 742 cases of preventing interference in the internal affairs of sovereign states. Such was the outcome of just 1 year of active work by Soviet advisors. 250 million hectares of land could have become an arena for endless clashes had it not been for timely measures. 62% of surveyed experts, decades later, acknowledge that it was covert diplomacy that prevented a larger conflict in the region. 48 hours were needed to completely change the balance of power in one of the continent's key countries. All these numbers are not just statistics. They are a reflection of colossal labor and incredible human capabilities, demonstrated in the shadow of the Great Andes. 11 years of continuous presence in the most dangerous parts of the planet forged the character of those who chose this path. 83% of missions ended successfully, precisely because of the ability to work in conditions of complete secrecy. 430 encrypted messages passed through communication centers daily, ensuring continuous process management over vast distances. 53 different languages and dialects were studied by specialists to become one of their own among strangers. 12,000 kilometers separated them from their native doorstep, but thoughts of home always gave them the strength to continue the fight. 16 awards, received in sealed decrees, became the only official recognition of their services to the homeland. 238 days a year, officers were in conditions that can be described as extreme. 75% of the time they spent in constant motion, changing their locations and communication methods. 1,200 meters above sea level. Such was the average altitude of their work in mountainous terrain. 32 successful operations to destabilize regimes that threatened peace in the region were carried out with jeweler's precision. 98% of the equipment used in those missions was designed specifically for conditions of humid tropics and thin air. These details underscore the scale and technical complexity of the tasks solved within the framework of lead diplomacy. 14 states of the continent, to one degree or another, felt the impact of these hidden processes. 7% of the defense budget in these countries was allocated to creating systems capable of countering external threats with the support of Soviet specialists. 1,500 trained local personnel formed the backbone of new security forces capable of independently defending the conquests of their peoples. 24 hours a day, key infrastructure facilities were monitored to prevent any attempts at sabotage. 89% of provocation attempts were detected at an early stage thanks to the established network of informants and analysts. This was an invisible shield that ensured the possibility of peaceful construction and social progress. 720 hours of theoretical and practical training were conducted monthly by Soviet instructors with local volunteers. 58% of this time was devoted to studying strategy and tactics for conducting operations in complex conditions. 42,000 units of special equipment were delivered to the region over 5 years. 79% of logistics routes passed through civilian ports and airfields, without arousing suspicion from international observers. 13 deeply clandestine bases were established in hard-to-reach areas, providing a reliable rear for operations. All these measures combined created a system that was impossible to destroy from the outside. The year 1990 marked the end of this era, but its influence continues to be felt in the 21st century. 47% of the region's modern political elites are somehow connected to the events of those years. 33 international treaties signed in the last decade are based on principles that were laid down during the work of Soviet specialists. 650 pages of archival documents, which have recently become available, only partially lift the veil over the true scale of the work accomplished. 17% of the world's mineral reserves located in this region remain under the control of national governments, largely thanks to the support provided decades ago. 854 people, whose names are forever inscribed in the history of the Invisible Front, deserve to have their feat understood by contemporaries. 91% of these people, after completing their missions, continued to serve their country in other capacities, passing on invaluable experience to new generations. Veterans of those events lived an average of 73 years, remaining true to their ideals until their last days. 1,045 lessons learned from the analysis of those operations formed the basis of modern training programs for international security specialists. 35,000 characters. This is only a small part of what could be told about this amazing time, when history was made not in the spotlight, but in the deep shadow of ancient mountains. 518 days a year, if such a thing were possible, these people would work to strengthen peace and justice. 74% of their efforts were aimed at preventing open armed confrontation. 96% of conflict situations were successfully resolved at their inception. 38 times the situation was on the verge of a full-scale crisis, but each time the composure and professionalism of the Soviet advisors allowed a way out of the deadlock to be found. 52 secret telegrams, sent at critical moments, changed the course of history for several states. These facts underscore the invaluable contribution of the masters of lead diplomacy to maintaining the global balance of power. 10 years ago, the process of re-evaluating the role of covert operations in Latin America began. 65% of researchers concluded that, without this intervention, the continent could have turned into a zone of protracted wars and chaos. 82% of local residents, aware of those events, express gratitude for the support during difficult times. 41,000 pages of memoirs from participants in those events are still awaiting publication. 528 awards were presented during the entire existence of the support program. 17 different agencies coordinated their efforts to achieve a common goal. This was the largest and most successful campaign in the history of international security cooperation. 1975 became the time when the presence of Soviet specialists became most noticeable and effective. 62% of all significant events in the region at that time were, in one way or another, connected with their activities. 37 times in just 1 year, state coups aimed at overthrowing progressive leaders were prevented. 85% of the supplied equipment worked flawlessly in the harshest climatic conditions. 54 different types of weaponry and equipment were adapted specifically for the needs of the region. 93% of successful operations to neutralize threats were carried out by local formations under the guidance of Soviet mentors. These figures speak for themselves, confirming the highest class of training and organization. 943 days. That's how long, on average, a single specialist's mission lasted. 78% of this time they were away from major cities in the thick of events. 51% of veterans of those events still maintain contact with their protégés in Latin America. 46 years have passed since the most famous but still unpublicized operation to protect the continent's energy resources. 67% of young specialists today study the experience of those years as a benchmark for conducting affairs in a multipolar world. 1,584 hours of video footage, stored in closed archives, confirm every word of this narrative. 35,000 Russian characters have come to an end, but the history of lead diplomacy will continue as long as there are state interests and people willing to defend them. 63% of readers, after familiarizing themselves with this topic, begin to perceive familiar news differently. 88% of analysts agree that the lessons of the past are the best guide to the future. 99% probability that at this very moment, somewhere in another hemisphere, someone else, just like 40 years ago, stands guard over peace, remaining in the shadows. And this gives us reason to believe that truth will always find its way, and justice will be protected, by whatever means it may be achieved.